world is really stressed. People are fatigued, they're burnt out. And even the people who are super chilled, they've conditioned their nervous system to be on high state of alert through years and years and years, and the thing just won't switch off. And I think we live in an information environment that tells us to be afraid as well. So if you're getting that message every single day, your nervous system's going trigger, 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 trigger. When we work with people in real high pressure, high consequence environments, the external world is not safe. Someone's trying to shoot at you. There's 100,000 people screaming at you. It's not safe. But that doesn't mean that you can't feel safe within yourself. And if you can feel safe and centered within yourself, then you're able to actually affect the outcome of that environment. True of leadership as well.
Welcome to the Work for Humans podcast. This is Dart Lindsley. This episode is about fear, the deep, often invisible fears that shape how we live and how we show up at work. Today's guest, Amon Woulfe, explains that these fears lie at the root of burnout, disengagement, leadership failures, and honestly, just a lot of subjective pain. They narrow our range, drive protective behaviors, and disconnect us from ourselves and others. Amon is the founder of 432HZ, that's 432 Hertz, a leadership development company with deep roots in psychology, transformation, and performance. Amon and others have developed an assessment, not the kind that classifies you and puts you in a box, but more of a diagnostic that shines a light on your own fears. I tried it out, and I discovered some things that I thought were strengths are actually defensive mechanisms that don't do me any good, so it was very interesting. In this conversation, Amon and I talk about how fear patterns shape leadership style, why so many change agents burn out, and what it takes to move from protection into presence. We also explore the limits of personality typing, the illusion of control, and how tuning in, really tuning in, can unlock more grounded, courageous ways of working and leading. All right, if you enjoy this episode, be sure to subscribe. Now, here's my conversation with Amon Woulfe. Amon Woulfe, welcome to Work for Humans.
Thank you, Dart. Lovely to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm going to probably ask you how you describe what it is that you do, but I will say it is the sort of thing that I have traditionally tried not to focus on, which is things that look like personality studies. And the reason that I've always been hesitant around things like Myers-Briggs and things like that is because I feel that they risk categorizing people and classifying people and making them less whole humans in the eyes of others. And one of the things I say is that every person in your company is more complicated than your company. And anytime you simplify, you lose something. But you have a very young product, although many of the ideas of it are old. And it's really much more about self-exploration and not classification. And so I wanted to talk to you about it, and I wanted to talk to you about it especially as it relates to leadership, because in the past we've had discussions about the limitations of some leadership behaviors, and some of them may be based upon fear, which is what you look at. So let's talk about fear. And why does it matter in life and at work?
I think it's one of those concepts that's either not talked about enough or hasn't actually been unpacked in a way that makes more sense than sharks, snakes, spiders, heights. And I think it's really quite simple in the mind for me that the mind is either in fear or it's not. It has quite a binary mechanism to it in many ways, although it's possibly the most sophisticated thing that has ever been invented in evolution. And I think we live in the safest time in human history, yet the world's drowning in fear. And many of these fears, I would say almost all of these fears, are completely psychologically constructed fears. They're not actually grounded in reality. They are fictitious parts of our imagination. And there's lots of studies that look at our fears and go that about 91%, 90%, 89% of times our fears never come true. And if they do, they're usually far better than we ever expected them to be. So we have this amazing imaginary mechanism that seems to make monsters and conjure up all sorts of things. And how does this affect leadership? It affects our decision-making, affects our clarity, it affects what we create in the world. And as Einstein once said you can't solve a problem with the same level of mind that created it. And I don't think you can solve a problem with the same level of fear that created it as well. I think we live in a time in history where we actually need to be leading and creating a future world beyond that, because if we don't, I think we may create a dystopia that we actually do not want.
I want to agree with the premise that we are in fear or not. I was once leading a horse down a very steep hill in the mountains, and it stepped on its own reins. And it went from being a perfectly calm horse, and 1 second later, being eye-rolling, ready to just lose it. I told that story to my manager at the time who rode, and she said that's because horses are prey. Horses have two states, fear and not fear, and they have a very quick switch, and I don't think humans are that different. And how did you become aware of its importance?
I think it revealed itself. We've been working in this field for well over a decade now, and we stand on the shoulders of those who've been working in this field for the last 30 years as well. So there's a lineage of work that's come to us from some of the grandfathers of applied sports psychology in North America. And if anyone has works in sport, the relationship of the mind to fear is quite paramount to your ability to actually perform in those environments. So it really came about through understanding a developmental journey in life, and that there are significant steps that we go through in terms of how we evolve as humans and how the mind evolves and how we essentially construct our mental operating systems in the mind. And that each one of these 9 systems in the mind has this ability to be what we would call in tune or out of tune. And what essentially takes the mind out of tune is it makes contact with a fear. And this is essentially one of the simplest stories to life, is that we are born into this world that we inherently usually feel safe and trusting, and then we experience pain. And when the mind experiences pain, it goes into fear. And then once it experiences fear, it goes into some form of defended state to actually deal with that pain or avoiding that pain. So this relationship with fear is fundamental to the human experience. So what we've been able to do is map the 9 core psychological fears that live in the mind, and that every single one of us will have contacted these in different ways and will have gone into different defended states and have constructed our sense of self and who we are based on these. And these show up, if I translate this into leadership, these show up as leadership styles. This could show up as I'm not using my power effectively enough, or I'm too dominating, or I'm running imposter syndrome, or I'm a complete workaholic, or I struggle with meaning. So there's lots of different ways that these actually show up and affect leaders. But at the core of it, we've never really trained and profiled fears for leadership. Maybe fear of failure is something that's talked about in leadership and corporate circles. But to be able to get to the depth of what actually makes the human mind go, and you mentioned before that your sort of aversion to personality profiling, I don't disagree with you. There's a book I love that's called Personality is Not Permanent, and a personality profile almost ruined my life. And he speaks about how he would have never met his wife and married if they trusted the 2 personality profiles that they got. So we're really big on not putting people in a box. We're really big on giving people a map of, as you said, self-understanding and how you can actually come to know how you have evolved and where you can evolve to as a human.
And I want to test and see if it's related to something that we've talked about on the show before. We've had 2 guests who spoke about trauma. One was Shalini Verma, who talked about personal trauma and how it affects management. And then we had Thomas Hubel, who spoke about the kind of trauma that's passed from one generation to the next. And what I see that you're doing is you're going a layer deeper than that. There's not just this black box called trauma that makes us behave in certain ways, especially under stress. But there's actually some texture there. There's some depth to that.
Yeah, trauma would be a severe response or a severe experience around fear, as opposed to, and we can talk about trauma or micro trauma. I think we all experience micro traumas in life, and that could be someone saying something bad about us or an experience of failing, as opposed to something that's a very challenging experience that probably needs a therapeutic process to actually bring us back from that. So I think there are just varying degrees of contact that we would have with these fears and the experiences that are wrapped around them. But for us, I think in this field and in many fields, we're a victim to symptomology. We're a victim to chasing what we can see. And, it is the holy grail to understand root cause and why it is and why we are the way we are. And I think that's one thing that this map has been able to really unlock for people is, I've had all this feedback before. Yep, I know I'm like that. Yeah, I know I'm reactive or a bit controlling or I need to step up more or the like, but it doesn't seem to change. But what we find is when people actually realize why it's there and where it comes from, and they can join the dots on their life as well and go, now I know. The worst place to have a fear is behind you. And this is what we do when we contact fear is we try and walk away from it. And the only way to transcend and overcome fear and to get to a place beyond that is we need to walk back towards the very thing that we fear. And if we do that, what we believe we find is as you approach it, it's almost like it vanishes into a cloud of mist. And the thing that you thought you feared is not actually true and real. And with the right tools and the right know-how of how to do that, transformation's a cliche in this world, Dart. But this is where transformation can really happen. And what's the definition of transformation? That something actually new emerges on the other side.
Let's talk about the structure of it and what the big pieces are. And why is your company called 432 Hertz?
I come from a very musical family, classical musical family. Granddad was one of the most eminent classical music composer in Australia of last century, 149 composed works, head teacher of composition at the Sydney Conservatorium of Music and received an Order of Australia Medal for services to music in Australia. And then grandma was a violinist in the Child Virtuoso Sydney Symphony Orchestra. So there's a deep classical music and musical heritage that comes through the family. So I tend to always think in sound and frequency. I myself have released 4 albums and being a recording musician and played live a lot in my life. So is my father, so is my mother. And I think Tesla said it himself, Nikola Tesla, that as soon as you understand that everything is just frequency and vibration, then you understand the keys to the universe. So I believe that is the key to it all. And that's the key to us as humans as well. We are essentially just frequency vibrating at different rates. I will always speak in terms of tuning and sharp and flat and use these sorts of metaphors. And the goal in this is to really create as many in-tune humans as possible. And I don't really need to know what you do. I just know that if I get you fully in tune, much like we would a musical instrument or a Formula One car, then I know that you're going to do incredible things in the world. But if you're out of tune and your team's out of tune and your organization's out of tune or your country's out of tune, we all know what it sounds like when things are out of tune. And we can all map that to very observable impacts in ourselves and our organizations.
Now, the study that you do, what do you call it, a study? What do you call it? A profile? What is it?
Yeah. Someone the other day, a senior HR said, this is not a profile. It's more like a map. It's navigable. It's not putting you in a box. It's not giving you a low to high. It actually gives you dimensionality. It has depth. It has breadth. It has height. It has distance.
So it has these 3 interrelated, I was going to say chunks, but now I'm going to say terrains, right? These 3 interrelated terrains, and one of them is range. How many of your leadership systems are online is the question there. What is a leadership system?
There are 9 mental systems. Technically, there are 12. We've spoken about this previously. I sometimes call this from in utero to enlightenment as a story, but it does. It does map the course of your life. It will show how many systems you've unlocked. Kind of like, are you running iOS 15 or are you running iOS 10? And each of these systems brings online certain mental abilities and capacities that give you certain superpowers that can affect your leadership, but it'll affect your life. It's essentially the software that's installed in your mind.
And is it a hierarchy? And I want to say what's in there. These are leadership systems: worthy, centered, growth-oriented, passionate, ambitious, accountable, and altruistic. Is that a hierarchy that you grow through, or is it more like a pick list?
What you mentioned there are specific mindsets within the systems. So the systems are the nervous system, the emotional system, the power system, the self-worth system, the expert system, the achievement system, the meaning system, and the wisdom system. These are the 9 systems that are all latent potentials that every human has access to. It's just whether you've turned them on or not. So the nervous system, the first thing that you and I were was a nervous system, literally. So it is the electrical circuitry of us. The next thing is our emotion system, more our limbic brain rather than our reptilian brain. It is our emotional life. Our power system, our agency, our will, our ability to initiate and assert ourselves in life to make things happen. Our self-worth system, original concept of who we are we enough, are we valuable? Our expert system, our self-confidence in our skills and abilities and competence to actually be good at something in life. Our achievement system, our ability to have ambition and drive and determination and set goals and achieve things in life. Our meaning system, that which creates meaning and purpose and what's true and real for us in a world that is inherently relative. Our integration system, our ability to hold systemic awareness, our ability to actually drive transformation, our ability to see the interconnection and interconnectedness between all things, and our wisdom system, grace, equanimity, wonder, our ability to hold the meta-awareness of systems within systems and hold the long view.
Do they tend to build upon one another?
They can come on developmentally in a sequence, but not always as well. It really depends on the story of your life. Some will get activated in different ways. Some of these do. Like we have this shift from that nervous system when we're born into attachment and bonding with our primary caregiver, the emotion system, into, as parents would say, the terrible twos, and how we now start to flex our willpower. So this will map from childhood development right through adult development as well. So there is definitely some sequence, but I do not think it's a monolithic one after the other process. No, I don't think evolution's that simple and linear.
So first of all, let's say you only talk about 9, but there's actually 12.
There is.
There are 3 at the top that are the sorts of things that the enlightened might have and have achieved. But because there's just not that many of us who are enlightened, for the most part, you don't go beyond the 9. And the ones that are at the beginning of the list, most people have passed through or mastered at some level. So what's the range that's sort of really at issue?
If we're talking about a leadership population, if you do this as a bell curve, talking between the 7th and 8th system in terms of range is where leaders are jumping across or opening up that next level. So we're really at that bridge between achievement and meaning. And we would see this in the workplace as well. It's not enough to just go in there and be a professional and have this persona at work where we achieve and have success. Like there's a deeper need for meaning now and purpose, and for people to be authentic and real. And, the younger generations are asking for this as well, that it isn't just this professional mask for work and then there's a different mask for at home. So I think that's where we're sitting. I think that's what organizations are asking to move into. And what lives beyond that is also creativity as well. So I think it's a really interesting jump-off point. You're right. There's the really higher systems that if you really want to go into self-transcendence and you really want to dissolve the ego and go into those places, there's plenty of mountains on the world where you could go down that road. But in terms of an organizational context, it's not really asked for. But I would actually say that the real game we notice is in the first 4 to 5 systems. They're the trenches. That's where we've got issues around power, connectivity, trust, burnout, self-worth. This is all the stuff that causes all the issues in leadership and all the issues in culture and teams. So in some ways, I'm like, there's no point building a taller tower on dodgy foundations. I think we can be obsessed with, I need to be at a higher level, or what's the next level, and it's like, no. We actually need to come back and get fully in tune. Let's do integration over elevation. Now, once you've got yourself all tuned up, then we can talk about your evolutionary journey from here. But to be honest, I could spend the next 4 decades of my life just trying to tune and clean up the place. And I think that would be a worthy life.
I used to have a slide that I would share sometimes, and it showed 2 different photographs. And one was somebody who had climbed up a ladder, and the ladder wasn't supported by anything, and they were above water. And I felt like many leaders had advanced in that way, which is that they'd gone up a ladder and now it was very precarious and it was very scary. And I felt their fear. And I had another picture, which was of a tree with its roots. And I said, the way real growth works is you deepen your roots while you grow your branches. And it sounds very similar to me. You can't just grab for the top of this if you don't have the foundations.
Absolutely. And we sit on 1.3 billion years of biology. There's a reason in this map that we've built that we do saliva stress hormone testing and biometrics, and the thumb and the cortex need to be one. The mind and the body are linked. We can't just be having a cognitive experience of life dragging our body behind. So we need to know how to work. We need to know how to create a healthy nervous system and work with this animal that we're sitting on. Really, really important. So I think that gets lost in leadership. Sometimes we would say we have the best educated, yet most overwhelmed leaders in human history. Do we need more PhDs? Do we need more knowledge? Like the world is drowning in knowledge. Do we have wisdom?
Can you tell me a story of when it's not working and a story of what it would look like when it is working, when someone does have a broader range?
Range for me is really around it being fit for context. So a nice way to think of it is if you're a mechanic in the small country town that I grew up in, you have a very stable life and environment. It doesn't change much. There's not a great deal of complexity. You probably don't need a massive amount of range. You just need to be in tune and you'll be a good person. You'll have a great life. But if you're sitting at the head of a very complex division or company and you've got intense mental and relational complexity that you've got to navigate within your organization and outside it in the broader world, you're going to need more range. Otherwise, you're going to be running Windows 95 in 2025 and you'll have that spinning wheel of death going on in your brain. And you'll be experiencing all sorts of things. You'll be in over your head, to use that waterline analogy. So people often ask us that, Dart. They'll go, what's a good level? And it's like, well, what's appropriate to the context that you're in? So don't go chasing a range that you don't need. I always believe that life will ask it of you. Wait till life asks it of you. That's what evolution does. You will naturally need to respond to how the environment is changing and evolving, and that's your call to adapt. I really discourage people just trying to chase more elevation and range. I think that could be more ego-driven than actually what's needed for their life and their leadership.
What does it look like when somebody doesn't have the range for their situation?
They're going to struggle. They will be feeling overwhelmed. They will be struggling to process the complexity of the environment that they're in. That won't just be mental complexity. It will be relational complexity as well. So there'll be conflict. They'll be struggling to keep up. Their decision-making will be poor. You would have that experience of where you get promoted into a bigger role and there's that deep breath and you go, this is new. I've got so much more to hold. I've got so much more to consider. Everything's more gray now. Black and white is gone. There is no right answer. So if a person doesn't have that range to handle that, the grayness and the ambiguity, and they're still trying to clutch for certainty and stability and binary relationships with everything, they're not going to handle it. They're going to freak out. They're going to get super stressed. They're going to get really overwhelmed, and they're going to make really bad decisions as a leader. And they're probably going to fracture relationships around them.
Actually, I think I can see it like a story here, which is there's a list of different kinds of leaders. There's the centered leader, the connected leader, the courageous leader, the assured leader, expert leader, achieving leader, authentic, transformative, and wise. So these are different levels. And I can see that, for instance, we often see expert leaders who are promoted into roles because of that expertise, but they find themselves in an environment that is simply mismatched with that expertise. It's not the same thing that they're working on anymore, and that they find themselves reaching for the wrong tools. Is that an example of that kind of trouble?
It is, yeah. Obviously very common, that one. they've been extended into a new environment that needs a different range, and they're still trying to use the old range. And it doesn't work. It doesn't fit. They need more capacities. They need more systems online to be able to function really well there. And you kind of just do a really simple transition up and go, well, the expert leader is a craftsperson. They're a technical specialist contributor. That's how they lead, through their expertise. You open up the next system, and now we have this classic captain mentality, champion leader, lead from the front, show the way, ambition, drive. They're the first one over the barricades, classic high performance leadership style from the front. You then open up the next range, and then we start to see more servant leadership come in, and we move from being the captain to being the coach and actually getting behind people and enabling and building stars rather than being the star. And then we expand to the next range, and we move beyond that from the coach to the conductor. And now we're actually sitting at a much higher level, and it's not even about that now. It's about, how do I bring this jazz quartet together of all different colors and types and create a symphony, create something beautiful. And it's a lot more emergent and adaptive.
And that's the transformative leader. And then there's the wise leader. And I will admit that I took this profile. And what's interesting about it is that I have some of the transformative attributes, and I sort of fade out in the wise. And what's interesting is when I look at wise, I'm like, don't even understand what that is. So what is a wise leader?
Oh, I'm sure there are many definitions. A wise leader in this model, they're not often asked for in leadership positions in companies as we know them today. I think the best you'll see these leaders often might be on a board or some advisory capacity. They're not just considering the company, they're considering how it is stitched into the broader fabric of society and time in history. And it's a generational viewpoint. Wisdom, if we could go to an indigenous tradition, like it's a 7-generation view. It's like, how would we really plant some trees we'll never sit under? And what is the role and nature of this in the broader context? And I think true wisdom really needs to be able to hold the whole world in its heart.
I have seen glimpses of that in board members. Interestingly, I observed John Morgridge, and he was on the board. I think he was the CEO before John Chambers of Cisco Systems, and he was John Chambers' advisor. And so John Chambers looked to him for wisdom. And one of the things I remember about Morgridge is he said, the greatest thing about running a company is the things we can do for the families who work here, the things that we can do for the community in which we're embedded. He was seeing it that way. And part of what he was seeing, I think, is that the real rewards are not your stock price. The real rewards are things that happen in the world around you that you help to cultivate.
What are the true measures of value that actually matter? And I think that wisdom, if I can add, wisdom can be tough and hard and dispassionate at times and could be seen as even callous. What is wise and beneficial for the whole might actually put me at disadvantage or discomfort. So I think that ability to hold what's actually needed for the health of the entire system and its longevity and its evolution, I think there's a great burden that comes with wisdom as well.
When we were speaking, you said that there's one level where a lot of people who are inside a company find themselves bumping their heads against the constraints of the company. And I want to talk about that one in particular because I suspect that very many listeners to this podcast are facing that, which is that they are in a context which is more rigid and they are seeing something bigger than that.
I'll give a practical example on that one. So every organization has its range. An individual has their range, so does an organization. And that range will be, these are the systems and this is the type of leadership that we are creating and wanting for this organization. It's the dominant range. And that will be built into strategy. It will be built into metrics. It will be built into the identity of the business. The challenge is that obviously there are many individuals that might actually profile above that range. So what's it like when you're above the center of gravity of your organization? Well, let's just say the center of gravity is looking for the up to the achieving leader. And, we want performance, we want results, we want quarterly profits. And that is the measure of success. And that is the measure of what is asked of you. Now, if you're at the meaning system and above that and you're questioning, you've switched from extrinsic motivation now to intrinsic motivation, you're questioning why and what's it all about and is this purposeful and meaningful and what does it mean to me and who am I and all of these bigger questions, that questioning usually leads you to get put on special projects. You're not so great for BAU. You're super creative, but geez, you can be contrarian and geez, you can ask a lot of questions and that can be a real pain. But we want to keep you. So we're going to put you over here where you can be creative and ask lots of questions, but you're not going to upset the apple cart over here. So that's a very common experience for individuals that are at that one step above that range. If you're 2 steps above and you're transformative and you're driven by a transformative agenda, you have a need to not only transform yourself, but the system around you. And if that is not appreciated or accessed by the actual organization that you're in, you'll do one of 2 things. And we haven't got into the sharp and flats yet. You can feel rejected by the system and you can go into the disillusioned spurn genius and you can take your bat and ball and go home and we'll stuff you. You figure it out. I'm going a bit Atlas shrugged here. I'm just going to go into the mountains and create my own thing. Or you're going to go sharp and you're going to drink a bit too much of your Kool-Aid and you're going to have the guru complex running and you're going to believe that you're more evolved and you can see how this whole place needs to change. And you may even force change when the system's not asking for it, which is really dangerous because you can actually break the system or you can get yourself ejected. So those people, if they can't realize that transformative agenda, a lot of them leave and become consultants or thought leaders and try and do it from the outside. It's a very common path to walk that one.
As somebody who was always put on special projects and eventually found that my transformative message, the system couldn't hear it, is the way to say it. And started a podcast so that I could start bringing more of that message out and started a consulting firm. It sounds, it sounds dead on, right? And partially because of the crowd that I move in, an incredible number of people that I work with are either inside companies and are larger than the system they're in. They're spending a lot of time talking about the system they're in and very unhappy. And then a lot of them are founders because they've said, I think I can do better. And they have gone out to do better.
And if you're going to stay in that organization, you can't expect it to come up to the range you're at. You've got to meet it at the range it's at. You've got to speak to it in a language that it can understand. I think that's one of the great misses that those, maybe like yourself at that time, can't hear it because you're speaking a language it doesn't get.
Yeah. And when you speak to it in its own language, you feel like you're lying because you're using persuasion that align to values or interests or perspectives that you just no longer believe in. And so there's always this question of, am I being persuasive or am I just lying? Let's talk about fear and tuning fear. The question here is, which of the 9 core fears are holding you back? And this is where the discussion of, here's the, would you say fear system? And here's whether or not it is sharp or flat and the different reactions. What I like about that is that because it's got a sharp and a flat and in tune, it's not just a toggle yes, no. And it might even be possible to be both at the same time. I don't know. I mean, it's like this idea that there's in tune and then there's out of tune. And I will tell you that even, in my own profile and talking to you about this, one of the things that I think is a challenge of this model, it's funny because it's a transformative model. And the question of whether or not it can be heard is always a question. And that it takes a lot of sophistication to understand sharp and flat core fears. So let's talk through some of them and see if we can start to get that understanding. But I will tell you the truth. I think it's something that you don't learn in a single podcast, in a single episode. It's something that you have to really spend some time with. So the question here is to look at which core fears are sharp and flat and to figure out which ones are holding you back. So first, let me just say what they are. Very basic survival. The second one is abandonment. then persecution, exile, inadequacy, failure, meaninglessness, insignificance, and self-deception. 2 of them, by the way, show up among the 11 core fears that include large carnivores, heights, deep water, all of the standards, spiders, insects. And that is abandonment, because one of the big biological fears is fear of going out alone, fear of being isolated, and exile, which is related to one of those fears, which is scrutiny of others. Is it that, or is that inadequacy or failure? So let's talk through these. If you can go through them and say just what each one is. And then we'll talk about sharp and flat for a couple of them.
So the fear of survival, we could even just call it simply the fear of mortality or the fear of death or the fear of, it can be physical survival, but it can be psychological safety, emotional safety, financial safety. Essentially, the mind does not feel safe. If it's in tune, it feels safe. If that fear is contacted and the survival fear is triggered, I don't feel safe. So there's a deep need to feel safe in the world. And if that gets triggered, then the nervous system gets triggered. And then your stress hormones fire and your fight-flight mechanism goes off and your heart rate variability changes. And like we mobilize to manage threat.
Which you might imagine is not that common. But I will tell you, my daughter taught in city schools, and there were a lot of weapons in the school and a lot of gun violence outside of the school, but kids were bringing guns into the school. And so there was actually a survival stress for the teachers in the school.
This one's usually out of tune for everybody because people are stressed. The world is really stressed. People are fatigued. They're burnt out. I would say that everyone's got work to do on this system, unless you're really super chilled. And even the people who are super chilled, they've conditioned their nervous system to be on high state of alert through years and years and years, and the thing just won't switch off. And I think we live in an information environment that tells us to be afraid as well. And this is what I say, safest time in human history, world is drowning in fear. We have been taught to fear for generations and been taught to be not safe. So if you're getting that message every single day, your nervous system's going trigger, 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 trigger. And if your nervous system's out, that just sends a wobble and an inflammation through the entire 9 systems. Everything's going to be inflamed if your nervous system is out. So, yeah, we need to create safety. And I always like to say that safety is an inside job. Stop waiting for your world to make you feel safe. When we work with people in real high pressure, high consequence environments, the external world is not safe. Someone's trying to shoot at you. There's 100,000 people screaming at you. It's not safe. But that doesn't mean that you can't feel safe within yourself. And if you can feel safe and centered within yourself, then you're able to actually affect the outcome of that environment. True of leadership as well.
And I want to go through each one of these at that level of depth. Let's talk about abandonment.
Rejection from the person that I deeply want to be connected with. It's every second of every day, the mind is going, am I safe? Are we connected? Am I safe? Are we connected? Am I safe? Are we connected? It's constantly scanning its environment for these 2 things. Connection is a deep, deep human need. And to feel like you have a trusting bond with another human is probably one of the greatest things it is. It's one of the greatest things that creates a long life, a good life, a happy life. It's our ability to actually feel human connection. So what's the fear? That those I want to be connected to are going to reject me or leave me. And can I actually trust that you're actually going to stay connected with me? So if I'm not feeling safe and trusting in that connection, I'll either withdraw and I'll keep people at an arm's distance. It's best not to let people get too close because if they ever leave me, it could hurt. So if I keep them at arm's distance and they leave me, it's not going to hurt. So we keep people at an emotional distance to manage that fear. Or we go the other way and we cling. And we try and smother people and keep them really, really close. And we become super needy and reactive and oversensitive. And we're trying to wrap them up in our emotional world so that they'll never leave me. So yeah, we withdraw or we go react. And, we could classically look at this in any kind of relationships or marriages as well, as that, one person's trying to move really close and the other person's keeping the other at a distance. Like very familiar attachment styles. And these attachment styles will then play out not only in your relationships, but in your leadership style as well. Your ability to actually build deep and meaningful connections with others is the glue that holds high-performing teams together.
Persecution.
That there's a power outside of ourselves that will have power over us. So there's a loss of control here. We had a loss of connection at the previous level. We had a loss of safety at the first level. Now we're dealing with a loss of control in relation to our environment. So what could persecution be? It could be anything from someone hitting us to bullying or someone teasing us to blowback for speaking up in a meeting or challenging something and there's a negative consequence through it, right through to if you're in a position of profile, it could be the media coming for you. There's lots of different ways where we feel like we get persecuted in life. If you've been made redundant, that often feels like a persecution experience. So there's some power outside of me that's going to have power over me in a way that is going to negatively impact me. So I'm either going to seek to control my environment, I'm going to seek to use my power over to make sure that nothing can have power over me if that fear is triggered, or if I go flat, I'm going to give up my power. Don't speak up, don't challenge, don't put your head up, be a bystander. It's better not to actually use it and submit to the power because then it won't actually hurt me in any kind of way.
So we've got survival, abandonment, persecution. Let's talk about exile.
So we make a shift here. The first three systems are pre-rational systems. It's our reptilian limbic brain. And we now start to move into prefrontal cortex and we start to move into the more rational, concrete functioning of the mind. So we start to now build a sense of self-identity. We start to develop a self-concept and a sense of who we are in relationship, usually to the group. So what is the great ancient fear of being in group? Well, it's the loss of belonging, but it's the fear of exile, that I'm going to get kicked out of the group. And if we go back thousands of years, getting kicked out of the group meant death. You couldn't survive without a tribe. So it's deeply in us, this deep need to belong to our families, to our communities, to our culture, to our companies, to our sporting teams. This deep need for belonging is everywhere. So what am I willing to do to belong? And if I'm feeling like I'm afraid of getting kicked out, I'm either going to go into a pleaser mode to do anything to be liked, wanted, needed, loved. You tell me how to fit in and I'll do it. I'll give up my entire sense of self to ensure that you never kick me out. Or if I go the other way to manage the fear, I'm going to become the dictator and the ruler, because if I rule the group and I set the rules, then I can't get kicked out of the group. Brilliant strategy. So again, one is an excess and one seeks to control, and the other one collapses into a deficiency around dealing with that fear. So if you get made redundant, we've had lots of redundancies in the last few years. You're not only having a deep exile experience, but you're also having a deep persecution experience.
On Work for Humans, we've been exploring the principles of multi-sided management, which is the belief that work is a product that every company designs, builds, and delivers to employees. Along the way, people started asking how they could put these ideas into practice. So I founded the work design firm 11fold to help your company create the kind of work that makes teams feel alive and engaged instead of dead and dull. So you can reduce turnover and build commitment. We're doing something revolutionary here. Learn more at 11fold.com. That's 11fold.com. Yes. And potentially abandonment, right? Which is that if you feel that you were part of a family and your leaders were parental figures to you, and now they're going to say, you're redundant, it's betrayal and also exile.
Yep. Can I trust people? Can I trust people again? Can I trust a leader again? Because I've had these experiences where my trust got broken and betrayed. And we'll talk about what needed to trust again. But yeah.
It's one of the things, too, that I think is often overlooked in layoff situations is that people in your organization are much closer to their tribe in the organization than they are to the company. And so when you see somebody else who's being abandoned or when you see somebody else who's being exiled, there's a contact experience of that. And you recognize that organization as a betrayer. I mean, you might have rational reasons why you don't think that's true, but you still know where you stand in relation to that organization in a different way.
Go through any restructure or org change, and it doesn't matter whether you're the one impacted or not, everyone's impacted. So the fear of exile and persecution is going to be going off in their minds anyway. And we sit there and you just watch the productivity of the organization just collapse through those change processes because everyone's in fear going, it could be me next.
Yeah, and it lasts like 5 years from a single layoff.
Yeah.
It lasts a long time. It might last forever. It lasts about 5 years for me. I work at companies that go through big layoffs. I'm not affected, but the fear, the distrust lasts a long time. And it's only through forgetfulness that you stop noticing that.
Well, even if you go through a divorce, same thing, abandonment. The person that I loved has left me. Depending on how well it goes, it could be a persecution experience. The family courts are usually an awful place to go through. Exiled, I've been sort of kicked out of that family unit. Do I have access to the kids? You can run it into that. And I think it doesn't matter whether it's a relationship, a marriage, a team, an organization. What's asked of us is the ability to love again, to trust again, because everything will end. It happens sometimes in better ways than others, but everything is going to end. Everything that we have known is going to pass.
Let's move on to the next one, inadequacy.
Deep need to feel credible and adequate at what we do, competent. If I'm feeling wobbly in my adequacy, I might go into imposter syndrome and feel like I'm a fraud and I'm a fake and it's only a matter of time before they find me out. So I'm going to defer, I'm going to be doubtful. Pretty common in leadership, this one. Or we go sharp and it's like, well, Dart, I'm going to prove to you how adequate I am. And I go into the know-it-all and the expert on everything. And I know everything about everything. And I'm the person at the barbecue who knows everything about my job, your job, the economy, sport, in the world. I'm desperately trying to prove my adequacy to you.
That's interesting. I've seen both of those behaviors a lot. And I never really associated the know-it-all with fear of inadequacy. That makes a lot of sense. I think I could listen to that with a lot more charity.
I think that's a lovely point as well. When we realize that it's not just people being a pain or difficult, that they're just responding to fear and they're just responding to pain. I think we can have a lot more compassion for each other in the world. And then how do we bring ourselves back? How do we bring ourselves beyond fear rather than just going, well, they're just, God, that person, I can't stand them, yada, yada, yada. How would I help them feel more adequate? How would I help them feel belong? Persecution, how would I help them feel more powerful and connected to their own agency? How would I help them feel more connected within themselves rather than trying to seek connection outside themselves all the time? How do I help you feel safe within you?
We'll get to it in a bit, but these are all things that they're all inside jobs. Although right now we're talking about how we can help others. The truth is, these are things that can be worked on. Failure. I think that one makes sense to me, but very often when you actually speak about them, I'm like, no, I didn't completely understand that one. So fear of failure.
Yeah. So the loss of success. And it doesn't matter what you want to be successful in life. It could be a great leader, a great athlete, a great parent, a great friend, whatever your measures of success are in life. This is your ability to go and get it. So yeah, it's kind of what it says on the box, isn't it?
It is. Okay, so I wasn't wrong. That is one that I understand just on its face value.
So I'm going to fail. So if I'm running fear of failure, I'm either going to turn into a rank workaholic and try and outwork failure. I'm going to try and outrun failure. I'm going to be over-responsible and over-driven and over-competitive. Or I'm going to go flat and I'm a bit like the Artful Dodger. I'm a bit like Teflon. You can't nail me down to any responsibility and accountability because if you did, then I'd be on the hook for success or failure. So you'll find both in organizations. One's got the sort of slippery shoulder and the other one's got the whole world on their shoulders. And we talk about fail fast, fail forward, safe to fail. You've heard all these cliches. If you don't know how to actually approach that fear, you've got no chance.
And with all of these, it sounds like willingness to face them squarely is the practice and to be aware of them. Next, we have meaninglessness. And actually, I'm going to connect the two, meaninglessness and insignificance, because there's a subtle difference.
Yeah, so meaninglessness, that why am I here? What does it all mean? The need for some greater, deeper existential meaning to it all. I think humans have grappled with this one for millennia. And this could be meaning in my work, meaning in my relationships, meaning in my career, meaning in anything. I think it is a really deep, deep need. And definitely seeing it in younger generations as well. I hear it so much, this real sense of meaninglessness. What's the point? We live in a post-truth era where it's so hard to know what's true and real anymore. It's so hard to know what information to trust or what voices to trust. Everything's being questioned. And if you go down questioning too far, you will end in nihilism. You'll realize that nothing's actually true, nothing's real. And that can be a really dark hole to go down, that one. Or we may end up as a lost seeker there, not knowing which way's up, not knowing who we are, and not really knowing how to anchor to any form of meaning in life. This is challenging as well because over the last 100 years, we've deconstructed a lot of the structures that created meaning in society in our lives, whether that be church or state or company. We've pulled Humpty Dumpty apart. So we're kind of living in a bit of a meaning crisis at the moment where we need new stories and new narratives to actually connect us into what it actually means to be human. If we go sharp here, we over-attach to meaning. I've gone away, I've figured it all out. I went on the weekend course, I did a retreat, I've come to this awareness and I know what's actually meaningful and true and real. And we weaponize that awareness and we become really self-righteous. And that's the real danger here of over-attaching to meaning and losing the perspective that meaning actually is relative. And what's meaningful to you is different to me. The beautiful subjectivity of it. So I think this is played out in many of the culture wars that we're experiencing, is we're weaponizing our awareness against each other.
Yes. And you talked earlier about how the leadership systems that organizations can express it as a whole, and then people are within it. And I'm sure that that's true politically, that when the government is expressing one system and you're left out of it, that it's something that can happen not just between a person and their company, but some of these things are between a person and their society.
Definitely.
So how is that different from insignificance?
So insignificance, the deep need to have impact, the deep need to know the measure of your life and legacy, and that what you did made a difference. And I think it's big at this system, this need to actually have some form of meaningful, significant impact on the world. So insignificance, if it gets triggered, will basically be disillusionment that you can actually have that impact on the system. It's not actually possible.
There is meaning, but I can't do anything about it.
I'm just a tiny speck in the universe and it's not possible. It's too big to change. It's above my pay grade. There's resentment. There's rejection from the system that occurs. I'm not valued. I'm not appreciated. I'm not understood. So you can still see it, but you separate from the system now. Rather than holding yourself within the system, you pull out of the system.
It's interesting because I've interviewed so many people about what they want from work. One of the most common responses, the first things people think of is, I want to make a difference. And they aren't even always clear on what that difference is, but they don't want to be insignificant. And I suspect that this is one that a lot of people are hung on. And they say that because that's where their main point of fear is. And so that's why they say, this is what I want from my job, is I want significance.
I think there's a really important distinction to make at this level. I think the shift at this system is moving from being the most intelligent thing in the system to realizing you're a part of an intelligent system, and that the system itself has the intelligence and ability to actually change and transform itself. It's not all up to you. And this is what happens when a person goes sharp here. They kind of get into guru mode and they go, right, I'm here to change the world. I'm here to change the world. I know what needs to be done. And they've done this. They've made themselves the most intelligent thing in the system. The system is immensely more intelligent than we are. The fact that this planet turns on every day and all the trillions and trillions of processes at every single cellular level happen to make this whole place happen, it is an absolute miracle. There is an intelligence to this. It's not an accident in my view.
What's interesting about that is that it seems to me that people who go sharp there might get a lot done.
They can. The risk is forcing change on a system that's not actually asking for it.
Yes. And then finding yourself in exile.
Yes, you can get rejected there, and then the system pushes back on you, or you break the system. I've seen that happen as well. You affect too much change and it can't handle it. So you don't get the impact you're after because the thing's actually fallen apart now.
Certainly seen that with new leaders coming into organizations and saying, I'm going to fix this whole thing, and causing incredible damage. And the system rejects them.
That's why I call it the conductor at this level, because that's how system change needs to happen. I haven't done a fair bit of it in my previous corporate career as well. It's an art form. It's not force. It really isn't.
Last one, self-deception.
The great existential crisis. Am I just hallucinating all of this? Am I actually this wise? It is the step before self-transcendence. So it can be a very discombobulating place to be in. Am I just deluding myself? Do I actually know all this? Can I actually see all this? So if we go flat at self-deception, we have the hermit. This person actually retreats from the system, goes and finds their cave in the mountains and meditates. The person who goes sharp here, they become quite aloof. They're very hard to reach. They speak in ways that sound poetic or abstract. So they're very, very, very distant. They're kind of like mad geniuses. They themselves don't quite know if they are imagining the whole thing. It's a really tricky one to articulate, this one, other than you're on your way to becoming a nobody. We talk about, oh, you need to let go of the ego. You've got to kill the ego. There's so much like narrative around how bad it is. Be careful what you wish for there, because transcending and letting it go, you're also going to let go of a lot of the things you probably enjoy in life as well. And if you're going to really anchor on the journey to oneness, you're going to start to transcend a lot of things that probably bring you a lot of pleasure. And they're not going to hold meaning anymore or significance anymore as well. So I think it's a really challenging spot to be in, that one. Do I want to stay engaged in this human experience, or do I actually want to march on towards transcendence? And am I actually kidding myself?
So let's say that I am sharp or flat in one of these as a leader. And I'll say one that I am flat on, which is I am flat on abandonment. I will absolutely, at the first whiff of abandonment, take my ball and go home. It showed up as flat in the thing, and that's absolutely one of my behaviors. And I can absolutely see how if you stuck around, you might get something done, that it's not effective in a lot of situations. And so let's say you find something, that you're a leader and you found a place where you're sharp or flat. How do I go about, and maybe you can talk about if there's one of yours where you're sharp or flat on, how do you go about addressing that?
So this is really what this map gives you. It is a detailed map of your inner architecture. It maps all of the different sharp and flat mindsets within those systems. It then maps them to a mental skill. And those mental skills are then supported by mental tools and mental models that shows you the how. Like, we always come from a very applied background. We need to teach you how to master this mind of yours. We need to give you a guide, a manual of how to actually do it. It's not enough to just create awareness. So that's really what we do. We tool you up. We skill you up with the mental skills and tools to actually walk back towards that fear. So if you're feeling that fear of abandonment, it's not enough to me to just go, Dart, you need to walk that way. Oh, great, Amon. Thanks for that. Yeah, cool. I'm just going to walk towards the very thing that I fear. I need to show you how. I need to give you the skills to actually do it. And that is the game. And once you walk through that, your relationship to it will be changed forever. Because there's a real cost. If you can think the amount of energy and life force and focus you spend defending against these fears, what if you could reclaim it all? And there's this notion that we love called evolvability. I believe at this time in history, as we go through a massive evolution in technology, that human transformation needs to meet the pace of technological transformation. It's essential. And I believe humans are going to be asked to make an evolutionary leap. So what this map gives you is a map of your evolvability. How far have you evolved? What's holding you back? Where are you tethered? What fears are you running? How much of your available potential are you actually leaking and diverting to try and manage fears? And if we can reclaim all of that, you will be able to keep pace with the pace of evolution, essentially. Your evolvability will go through the roof. Or you're going to spend the rest of your life trying to manage your fears. I guarantee you the quality of your life will be drastically different if you are in tune versus out of tune.
I have a handful of questions I ask at the end of every show. And one of them is, what job do you hire your work to do for you?
It serves my evolution. It evolves me. It's my contact with reality in a significant and meaningful way. I think it's what life is asking of me. I think for everyone in their life story, there's a path and there's something that only you can do. And I believe that this is the best expression of that I've been able to find in my life of what I have to offer.
Do you struggle with fears? With being sharp or flat?
I do have my sharp and flats, as we all do. Some things are in tune, other things, I would say that there's an immense amount of less fear than there ever has been. But, one of the fear of insignificance, I can really relate to that one. I constantly check my disillusionment. And I constantly have to re-engage with my trust in the system. And I constantly need to stretch myself to hold the whole world in my heart and the whole system in my heart, not just the bits of it that I like. There's a daily, weekly practice. So we all have our work. I've contacted these fears in very significant ways all throughout my life. And I think that is where a lot of this work has come from, has been my own journey of moving through fear and back to love. Through fear and back to trust, through fear and back to safety again. Because what's the alternative?
What does your work cost you?
It costs me comfort.
You're walking towards your fears.
It costs me my comfort, absolutely. It is uncompromising in its reward, but its discomfort. And I think the nature of one's work, I do believe, is reflective in the nature of their life. It can be exhausting to keep facing fear. However, I believe that anxiety is the outcome of not facing our fears. So I think it asks a lot, Dart. It asks a lot to not be in fear. And I think if anyone who's listening could ask that of themselves, like, what would be asked of me to truly live a life beyond fear and to lead beyond fear? My personal philosophy in life is be brave. And this requires an immense amount of courage to keep choosing trust, keep choosing love, keep choosing to create in a way that's not actually coming from fear. When there are so many things in our life, in our organization, in our systems that reward us with fear.
Where can people learn more about you? And where can they learn about 432 Hertz?
Yeah, great. So 432hertz.global is the website.
Is it Hertz or HZ?
Oh, yes, sorry. 432hz.global is the website. So you can learn a little bit more about us. If anyone wants to experience their map and find out their relationship with fear, they're very, very welcome to.
One thing that we didn't talk about is the fact that a part of this mapping includes running tests on your biochemistry or wearing an oral ring so that you can measure real stress. Not the stress we've suppressed. But so if anybody's thinking of doing this and thinking of looking into this, it's just the beginning of work. But even just taking the time to know it, to know what your map is work. And there's more than we've actually talked about.
I'd even add to that, this is deep work. And if you really are interested in what I believe is one of the most comprehensive and depth-based maps that you can use to understand who you are and what makes you tick, this is kind of it. It's really been built for a new age, a new era. So yeah, it's holistic. You will be wearing things and spitting your saliva into tubes and mapping out your inner architecture. And it's quite a different experience. But if I could just say, I see this as a lifelong map. This is not a one and done. Oh, that was interesting. Put it in the top drawer, never to be seen again. This is meant to be a companion for life that's going to help you navigate yourself and your life to the end of days. If you can get to the end of this map in your lifetime, I'd be seriously impressed. And there will be times where different fears, maybe you've never experienced this fear before, but then it gets pressed because something happens in your life. Straight away, it gives you this map to go, oh, that's where I've gone. Oh, that's how my mind's showing up. Yep, I can get that. And that's the fear. Right, I get that. So it's a map to navigate the terrain of your life throughout your entire life and to also understand those around you as well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for coming on the show. Thank you for taking so much time to do my map so that I can really understand this, although I don't completely understand it still, because I think it is something that you learn about. And it's a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Dart. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining me for another episode of Work for Humans. If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to podcasts. And share the show with one person you think would get value from it. Believe it or not, this really helps us grow the show and reach more people who want to build the kind of work that people really want. As always, thank you to my producer, Jason Ames at Ninth Path Audio for his insights into content and his high standard for quality. Final note, the opinions shared here are my own and not the views of Google or Cisco Systems. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.